Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on racism, xenophobia, and discrimination in the African context. This is a series of regional webinars that the Commission of the Churches on International Affairs of the World Council of Churches has been organizing since August this year until December. And the purpose of these webinars is to discuss, analyze, and reflect on the different manifestations and expressions of racism, xenophobia, and racial discrimination in different parts of the world, and to try to see also which are the areas, the common areas that we can identify, and also try to find possible ways of collaboration. These webinars are brought to you by the Commission of the Churches on International Affairs of the World Council of Churches, and this is part of the Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace focus on racial justice for 2019. This webinar will be co-moderated by Professor Dr. Isabel Apao-Firi, Deputy General Secretary of the World Council of Churches, and Mr. Masimba Kuchera, Commissioner of the CCIA, WCC CCIA. Now, Isabel and Masimba, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sigma, for the introduction, and thank you for organizing these webinars. And welcome to all the participants and all the speakers. The webinar is supposed to last for 90 minutes, and if necessary, we have a grace period of 30 minutes. We may tap into it or we may not. The original plan was to have 7 speakers, and unfortunately, Dr. Agnes Abwam is unable to join us. So we end up now with 6 speakers, which is also good because that means we'll have more time for discussions. The presentations will be about 7 minutes each, and the first presentation will be by Professor Dr. Demain Solomons. The second one will be by Reverend Emmanuel Miko, and the third one, it may be by Dr. Sabelo Gumedze, but it depends on at what point he is going to join in the discussion. And then we'll have a presentation by Reverend Dr. Nagaju Mookie, which will be followed by the last presentation, the 5th presentation by Reverend Professor Basella Iyale, and we'll also hear from Advocate Gloria Mafole. So I welcome you all, our speakers, to the presentations. After each presentation, we'll give an opportunity for one person to ask a question or make a comment. The presenter will not respond immediately, but will note down the comment or the question, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. And after all the speakers have presented, we'll have about 25 minutes of discussions and questions. Again, we ask you to go to the chat, to the group chat, where you post your questions and your comments. We'll be picking them up from there. And the speakers will also look at the chat room and pick up questions that are directed to them. So whenever you are asking a question or you want to comment, please mention the person who you want to respond to your comment or to the question. And then at the end, we'll also give the speakers an opportunity to respond to all the questions in brief, because there will be 2 to 3 minutes each for the responses. And Masimba, the other moderator, is also going to have an opportunity to respond, to summarize, the conversation for the day, and Sigma will close the meeting again. So let me take this opportunity then to introduce our first speaker. As I said, it's Professor Domain Solomons. He is a theologian who teaches systematic theology and social ethics at the University of Western Cape in Cape Town, South Africa. So over to you, Professor Solomons. You have 7 minutes, which starts now.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and also thank you very much to the organizers for organizing, the series of discussions on, the issue that has been with us for a while, and I suspect will be with us in time to come. Of course, my task is to map the landscape for the issue on racism from a South African perspective. Of course, when you think about South Africa, the issue of racism is a contested one, one of competing narratives. In essence, we are people of different perceptions of reality. For this reason, the issue of racism is tied up with ideological conflicts, which makes it particularly difficult, yet an interesting topic to deal with. Be that as it may, in the South African context, government racism came to an end in 1994. This is when, South Africa's colonial and apartheid history, institutionally at least, came to an abrupt end. Now, in theory, this means that Black people were now allowed to participate in all aspects of civil and political life. The most important being that Black South Africans in particular, were now able to occupy government, and most importantly, also to vote who the people will occupy office. Now, at present, we have a system dominated by Black bodies. We have access to many things that under apartheid was simply inaccessible. So yes, many good things has happened in South Africa over the last 25 years. However, make no mistake, many issues associated with our history of racism still remain with us. Now, South Africa, generally speaking, is probably one of the most racialized countries in the world, largely because we carry around with us, this internalized remnants of our colonial and apartheid history. It is, as Alan Busak, one of the liberation theologians in South Africa, has stated not too long ago, if you think about racism, if you think about apartheid, we buried apartheid in a shallow grave too close to home. And I think that in a way sums up exactly the challenges we are confronted with in the South African context. And you see it in many sectors of society. You see it in business, you see it in schools, you see it in universities. The race issue is at the heart of many of the challenges that we still face today. Now, as South Africans, I think we've internalized the racism of colonialism and apartheid. And of course, this has not helped us in effectively addressing many issues or the many manifestations of racism that we are confronted with today. Among other things, economic apartheid and classism, and more recently the xenophobic outbreaks in South Africa are good examples of how South Africans, in a way, have internalized racism. I've said this before, and I will say it again today. I'm not surprised that xenophobia reared its ugly head in South Africa. It has happened in the past, and I suspect it will most probably happen again if we don't address the issue, if we don't go to the heart of the matter as far as racism is concerned. Why? Because I think, unfortunately, in South Africa, we are sitting with a Black populace that has been so dehumanized, and often it is the case that the most vulnerable in South Africa bears the brunt of this dehumanization. It would be women, children, and what we've seen recently is our Black brothers and sisters from the rest of the African continent are now bearing the brunt of this history of racism that is the South African narrative by and large. Of course, there's no excuse for white racism in the same way that there should be no excuse for black on black racism that we see in South Africa today. Now, if apartheid thinking were ever to be successful, this would be the fruits of that history. and xenophobia being one of it. The black body basically being reduced to non-personhood. In this sense, most of us have never affirmed our blackness in South Africa. That self-love that the black consciousness thinker, Steve Biko, alerted us to. Now, white racism told us that we were nobodies, and many of us believe this. In our present context, we spread this poison to our fellow Africans, highlighting the belief that they, like us, are non-persons or nobodies. People to be murdered, not in private, but in full view of the rest of society. In that sense, apartheid achieved its objective. Today, a white life in South Africa is still worth more than a black life. So government structures, if you think about apartheid, is no more, but the racism that gave rise to apartheid is still alive and well. So as South Africans, I think we have a number of things that demand our attention. If we are serious about the sustainability of the project we call South Africa, we need to address a number of issues. And I just want to highlight a few of those. And that would include institutional racism. I think today in South Africa, we are still confronted that people are excluded based only on the color of their skin. And of course, there are clever structures to keep people out of many institutions. And of course, that goes to the heart of white supremacy. That somehow today there is still a common old belief that someone is competent just based on, you know, the color of their skin, and in this case it would be just because a person is white. The assumption is automatically that they know what they are talking about. In the same way, if you think about black inferiority, which is an internalized type of self-hate that is affirming itself and rearing its head over and over again when you speak to black South Africans. Of course, inequality in South Africa, by and large, still has a black face. Of course, South Africa is often hailed as, for all the wrong reasons, as the most unequal country in the world. And of course, oftentimes it is black bodies and black people bearing the brunt of that inequality. And then, as I've highlighted earlier on, the issue of xenophobia is, you know, something that is a deep concern and something that needs to be addressed if we are serious about the sustainability of this country. I want to put forward that this is not just only an issue that can be fixed through legislation. We have great laws in South Africa, often hailed as, you know, some of the most progressive in the world. Of course, this is not enough. In this context, I think it is also important for the South African churches to come to the party. Of course, they still have an audience, still have significant influence. So in this sense, religious leaders have to use their influence in terms of rooting out the issues with regards to racism. Addressing the issue of racism is tricky business, I think, because many of us are still, in South Africa at least, still in denial about who and what we are and what we have become. In this sense, it is as much a theological issue, I think, as it is a socio-political or an ethical one. In this sense, we have our work cut out for us, I think it's important for us as a religious community to address this issue effectively, and we need to be as direct with the black-on-black racism that we see today in South Africa, as direct as, you know, if we confront the white racism. So in this sense, I think it's very important for us to be balanced in terms of how we deal with the challenges of racism in South Africa today. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. I find it very inspiring, especially, you know, for reminding us that although apartheid is gone, we still have the side effects of it, which are manifesting in white supremacy in institutions, as well as, you know, the hatred of, you know, the black by themselves and inferiority that is associated with it. So I want to invite one question or comment. Okay, I see comment from Frank can I just read it? A comment
Okay,
from
yes.
Frank, yes. He says, you know, Professor Demen, very good presentation, thank you. How is education being used to address this neo-colonial thinking among Black South Africans? How can the language, churches, values, patriotism, etc., be used to promote Ubuntu? Do you think we can achieve equality between black and white in the Black and white South Africans? So there are so many questions, but I'm hoping that, you know, when we come back, you will be the first one, you know, to respond.
Thanks, I will.
Okay, so now I hand over to Masimba to invite Dr. Sabelo Gumede, who is here now.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon. Allow me to introduce Dr. Sabelo Gumede. Is the head and senior researcher of the Research and Development Unit of the Private and Security Industry Authority of South Africa. He has more than a decade of experience in research as a researcher, and he's done a lot of things, international human rights law. He's a teacher, he does supervising and project management. And he's also on the working group of experts on people of African descent. So over to you, Dr. Sabelo Gumede. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that I had a glitch regarding connecting to this meeting. First of all, I would like to state that when we are discussing racism, xenophobia, and discrimination in Africa, we cannot discuss it without talking about the enslavement of Africans, trade, including transatlantic slave trade and colonialism. Now, if you look at the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, it clearly states that these remain the sources of and manifestation of racism, xenophobia, and related intolerance. And in fact, when you talk about enslavement and the slave trade and colonialism, these have had long-lasting effect on the African continent and African people themselves. So whenever we are discussing about racism, xenophobia, and discrimination in Africa, we should not isolate this. We should look at it in context of what has happened in the past. Now, it is also important to note that these were the most appalling tragedies in the history of humanity, not only because of their apparent barbarism, but also in terms of their magnitude, organized nature, and especially the essence of the victims of these acts. So there is no talk of racism, xenophobia, and discrimination before these. There was no talk of racism, xenophobia, and discrimination before these unfortunate events that took place in Africa. The continent has also witnessed apartheid as well as genocide, which had their own dynamics in terms of perpetrating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination in some parts of the continent. It must also not come as a surprise that within the African continent today, racism, xenophobia, as well as discrimination exist. But they do not exist in isolation. The DDPA also states that colonialism has led to racism racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. It further states that Africans and people of African descent were victims of colonialism and continue to be victims of its consequences. So when we are talking about these consequences, we are not only talking about consequences affecting people of African descent in the diaspora. It also affects Africans within the African continent itself. The DPPA further notes that that apartheid as well as genocide are major sources and manifestation of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. The enslavement of Africans and the slave trade, including the transatlantic slave trade, had negative implications for African societies. The enslavement of Africans was not only dehumanizing, but also made Africans not to think of themselves as worthy. The concept of Ubuntu, which emphasizes the idea that I am because you are, was actually diminished. It must also be noted that some Africans, including African chiefs as well as kings, did participate as enablers of the slave trade. Some African rulers exchanged captives for guns, and we should not be blind to this fact. This basically perpetrated inequality. Because of the slave trade, African societies became poor. The social fabric was also dismantled. When the social fabric of a society is dismantled, members do not see one another as friends and willing to help each other. They cannot be inspired to keep their place a positive as well as a pleasant place to live. This was the unfortunate reality of the African society. As if this was not enough, colonialism also brought a false hope of doing away with the slave trade. It actually made the situation even worse. The impact of colonialism was immense and pervasive. European nations claimed African territories, occupied as well as administered them as if they belonged to no one. African people were treated inequitably. African natural resources were literally stolen, leaving Africans to fight amongst themselves. And this led to discrimination amongst themselves. Due to the arbitrary boundaries that resulted from the Berlin Conference and consequently colonialism, this resulted in boundaries and territorial disputes which have led to Africans not seeing one another as brothers and sisters. Colonialism and neocolonialism continue to dismantle the social fabric of the African society. As if colonialism was not enough, apartheid also presented another dimension whose economic legacy and social effects continue to the present day, particularly in the case of South Africa. The notion of white supremacy, which led to the social and forced separation of Black Africans from other races, indirectly led South African people not treating each other as equals. This became even worse with those Black Africans coming beyond the borders of South Africa. Self-hatred and self-rejection of Africans must always be understood in context. This leads to racism, xenophobia, and discrimination amongst Africans themselves. Genocide in Africa was never designed by Africans. Before the enslavement of Africans, the slave trade, colonialism, and apartheid, the intentional destruction of a people was never heard of. Instead, genocide resulted from Western nations inculcating a culture of supremacy of one ethnic group over another. This remains to date as genocide has lasting and profound effects on Africans. Africans cannot be the same. So the point I'm driving at with my presentation, Africans as being racist. Let us look at Africans as being xenophobic. Let us look at Africans being people who are perpetrating discrimination amongst each other. We're not looking at these events that happened in the past. On this note, I would like to thank you, and I'll be willing to take any questions moving forward. Hello.
Masimba, can you switch on your microphone? We can't hear you.
I just switched it, Masimba.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sabelo Kumete, for your info. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I can.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kumete, for your informative and credible presentation. Now that we see that you don't have a lot of time with us, could we have an exception so that he responds to at least one question before he leaves?
Okay, so we are inviting comments or questions from the participants to questions to Dr. Sabelo Gumede.
There are already 2 questions in the chat room, although they are assigned to Professor Domain Solomon. Maybe we can also convey some of these to Mr. Gumede, but I leave it to you, the moderators.
Okay, maybe Masimba, if you can read question number 2.
Maybe I'll do that, Isabel.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe you can read from there.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I cannot hear anyone talking now.
Mr. Gumede, can you hear us? Mr. Gumede, can you hear us?
Looks like we have lost him.
Yes, he was joining from his phone because it didn't work from his computer.
Okay.
But I think it's disconnected now. So maybe, yeah.
Right, because the second question deals with the issues that he had raised. It says, racism in Africa has shifted from the differences in culture, traditions, and practices between the whites and the blacks. What are the possible causes of racism in South Africa between fellow black South Africans and other black Africans? This question goes to the first speaker, but we think it's a question that, applies also to the second presentation.
So let's probably move on. Let's try to get the question to Dr. Gumede and try to get him on. If he fails, then Professor Solomon will take it up during the discussions.
Okay, thank you. So shall we move on then to the third speaker? Right, our third speaker is Reverend Emmanuel Wai. He is a pastor serving with a Presbyterian church in Cameroon. He is a former student of Ecumenical Bose Institute, and currently he is an advocate of human rights for the people of Northwest and Southwest of Cameroon undergoing serious political crisis. So over to you, Reverend Emmanuel Wai. You have 7 minutes.
I hope you can hear me now. Okay. I want to greet everybody I can see and those I cannot see. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. I want to apologize for network issues here where we are. We're trying to switch from one gadget to another. Right now, I'm trying to use my phone. So I'll quickly try to give a rundown of a Cameroonian perspective as far as racism is concerned. But I want to draw our attention to the fact that we see these three terms, racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, as kind of interrelated to one another. From if we want to explain the Cameroonian situation better, they are kind of interconnected. So we say racism in Cameroon is multifaceted. It's quite multifaceted, but I want to take some few points. I'll dwell more on the direct typical examples, contextual examples that we can trace within this context to tell you how we understand this topic. Number one, we're talking of all tribal conflicts and conquest of certain people as slaves from within the African context. There are tribes that believe that some other tribes are slaves to others, or they're kind of inferior human beings, and they are only supposed to be used as slaves. And I'm sure this is what gave credence to the slave trade when the time came. In our Cameroonian context, we're talking of how the Bantus look at people like the Pygmies. We're talking of how the Balis look at Bafangis, or the Balignonges, and the Bawa. A second aspect that I'll talk about is color. It may look a little bit strange. We all know that Cameroonians are black people from Africa, but we also have our own impression about people of color or people of other color. For example, what we call in our culture Mookie, which is only known as albino, people we consider as fragile human beings, too soft to be considered as humans. In the same way, there is a new growing philosophy within my context, which seems to want to look at the white people from a physical racial perspective, to also consider them as weak. I see this as some form of a retaliation to the old racism principles that we always know, white people looking at black people as inferior, but it's building up a new ideological perspective to show that if the black albino as weak and fragile, then it means even the white man himself is not a superior human being, as some would claim. This is what is trying to go on now. And then don't also be surprised that within the context of Cameroon, we have a problem too with people who are over black. I give you an example of the Tupuri or the Mundangs in the north of Cameroon, who are considered as frightening, or people who cannot mingle with other people as a result of their too much blackness. And the third point I want to raise here are the sizes of people. You know, Cameroon has pygmies in the east and somehow dwarf who are intermingled among people. These people are regarded within our context, cultural, traditional, and even it's becoming even in our political context as very inferior and cannot allow open opportunities in various quarters of the state. Of course, colonialism, or I would say the heritage of colonialism and its background, which has brought the chaos in which we are today in Cameroon. In my country, the French lifestyle is considered more free and civilized, while the Anglo-Saxon is considered old-fashioned, outdated. And for this, you can see that the Francophones sometimes feel they are more better because of their colonial background. And the fifth point adds to this, which is now the French language itself. Language. French is style, and it's a language for the top educated, a language for better Cameroonian, it is believed. That's why don't be surprised if we enter Cameroon, and even the capital of Cameroon, Yaoundé, and approach a hotel, which is supposed to be a public facility, where you will serve from the bilingualism background of Cameroon. Don't be surprised that if you express yourself in English, you might not be fully attended to, because even the receptionist there does not or do not want to know the word for chambre in English, which is room. So if you ask, please, I need a room, he will tell you what is room, because he or she doesn't want to know, and he will end up to tell you, please speak in French, or parle en français. There is another point of accent. We have people in Cameroon who are discriminated upon because of their accent. They will not be employed. They will not be given opportunities in the public because they are not understood, according to some people. And coming even right into the church, I was discussing with my friend Solomon Wara, I hope he's online now listening to us, about how the church too and some religious institutions are promoting this idea of racial differences and discrimination, even from the perspective of some Christians group looking at themselves as superior to others because they belong to a particular faith family. I'm talking about a conflict between Pentecostalism and what we call here Orthodox Christianity.
Are you there? Reverend Emmanuel, why?
I think he got disconnected.
Oh, shame. Okay.
Somebody hear me?
Yes, now he's back.
Okay.
There's a comment that, they have lost the sound.
Okay, please, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, please, I'm sorry.
Yes,
This is what we, I hope you bear with us. Yes, please, I was on the spiritual issue, even from the spiritual perspective. That's how we look at this racial discrimination sometimes in Cameroon. And what we call here racism or discrimination in the context of Cameroon and interconnected with each other. So to understand it, I have to pick out this little example to share with you. And to crown it all, to tell you that the Cameroon crisis today, because of their colonial background, handed over to us, is regarded as superior over to that of the Anglophone, which is supposed to be a cultural perspective within the nation, which is appreciated for both. The Francophones feel superior over the Anglophone, and it's strange that the government of the country kind of promote this by its application of like what we can call at the public sector in the country, how they treat people of English-speaking expression and French-speaking expression. And so maybe some other time we talk about the crisis in Cameroon, but I just wanted you to see that the background of this is kind of related to this whole issue of racism. And the information coming to us these days is that there are xenophobic tendencies. There's a serious fight that occurs in Sang-Malima in the south region of Cameroon between the natives of Sang-Malima, where the president of a country actually comes from, against the northerners. These are the northerners I'm trying to tell you who are discriminated upon because of their pigmentation. They are called too black or sometimes too tall. Now, so it's contradictory to be discriminating against people who are too short and then too tall. So we don't really understand what is going on, but we pray that it will, through these forums like this, we may have opportunities to educate people more and more. So thank you. Maybe next time we'll talk about the crisis in Cameroon in detail.
Right. Thank you so much for your informative and compelling presentation. We really want to know more about Cameroon, and maybe during the discussions we'll come to that. I now invite questions or comments, one person only.
Well, I hope I am given the floor to do that. I hope I am given the floor to do that.
Yes. Did you go to the group chat to write your question or comment?
No, I didn't. I can make my question here.
Okay.
Yes. To start with, I want to thank all the speakers for the insightful presentation so far. But with specific question to Reverend Y from Cameroon, I want him to somehow explain, because for me, what I see these days is that there is a strong link between migration, racism, and xenophobia, and then it comes in different shape and colors. So my specific question would be that, is there a link about, for instance, people moving from the Anglophone to Francophone side to secure better economic opportunities and jobs, and then these are one of the reasons that is fueling the crisis, when the side that receives more of these people feel strongly that their opportunities are being taken away from them, maybe as a result of this migration, if any. So I would like Reverend Y to respond to that.
Okay, thank you so much. We've noted the question. And now I hand over to Masimba to invite the fourth speaker.
I don't see Masimba connected.
Oh, he's been disconnected.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe we can have some question and answers before we move to other speakers.
Okay. Do we still have, Reverend Emmanuel with us?
Yes, he's with us.
Yes.
Right. Can you respond to that question that has been asked about migration of people from English-speaking Cameroon to French-speaking Cameroon? Maybe that could be the cause of, these conflicts that are going on in Cameroon.
Yes, about migration, it has a little background. First of all, opportunities that are supposed to be for the common good of the people are actually kind of neglected when it comes to the Southern Cameroonian side. And so there are a lot of people around Southern Cameroon find it difficult to cope within their context. They are not given the talents, so they are left with no choice to move now to the other side of the country. When they move now to the other side of the country, they face these challenges because the government has kind of centralized every administrative issues at the capital city in Yaoundé. Even for you to earn a salary, you have to go to Yaoundé to follow up everything. Everything in Cameroon is about Yaoundé. So when it happens like that, the people reach the capital city and are kind of chastised, dehumanized, insulted in public offices, and sometimes sent home without the services. So the migration problem in within Cameroon from the south to the east, well, we can say contributes to some of this chastisement. So I think the speaker who has this question is very correct. We can link it from that.
Okay, thank you. So shall we now move to the fourth presenter?
Who is?
Masimba, are you there?
Yes, I'm back now.
Okay. Can you introduce
fourth presenter?
Yes.
Is it Dr. Nagaju Mookie?
Yes.
So our fourth presenter is Dr. Nagaju Mookie, who's another Presbyterian. So we have two Presbyterians in the house. She is an ordained minister of the Presbyterian Church in Rwanda and Burundi, and finalizing her term as Deputy Secretary of the United Evangelical Mission, regional office based in Tanzania. Dr. Nagaju Mookie, you have 7 minutes, which will start now.
we have Reverend Mookie with us here?
I think she's disconnected.
Oh, she has disconnected. Okay. Right, maybe we can move on to Reverend Professor Basella. Yali, are you connected?
He will shortly, but
he's also disappeared.
He's back now.
Yeah, okay. Right, Reverend Professor Basella Yali, are you connected?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm going to introduce you, or you. Maybe he has been muted.
No, he's not muted.
But he can't hear.
But I am hearing you, Doctor.
Oh, you are here. Is that
yes?
Reverend
I got
Dr.
the intro. Yes, I got the introduction from Masimba, who introduced me already.
Yeah, please go ahead and present, because we thought you were not around, because then you were not speaking.
So something went wrong, but I spoke. The first statement I made, he introduced me as a pastor from the Presbyterian Church in Rwanda and Burundi, but I said I am a Rwandan pastor.
Okay,
but I will speak about the ethnic ideology in both countries.
Right, of Rwanda and Burundi.
Yes.
Okay.
I am requested to speak about Rwanda and Burundi.
Okay, there are others, who have been disconnected. Yes. Go ahead.
May I continue? Okay. Now, I'm speaking about the topic we were given about racism, xenophobia, discrimination. But to make it very concrete, according to my context, we don't use these three words. The situation of Rwanda and Burundi, we use ethnic ideology.
Okay.
It is still impossible to believe that in a space of 3 months, 1 million of people in Rwanda were killed during the genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi. This genocide is located especially in the history of Rwanda. It is also important to mention that. Are we together?
Yes. It looks like some people are coming in and going out, but go ahead.
Okay. It is important to mention that the history of Rwanda shows that Rwanda has 3 ethnic groups that have been identified with distinct aspects. This especially is connected to their socio-economic status. The Tutsi were related to the Ketos, the Hutu with their land, and the Twa with the forest. These 3 ethnic ideology, these ethnic groups were linked by their monarchy. The king was the unifying all the 3 ethnic groups. During the colonial period, however, the monarchy lost much its legitimacy, and it became identified by the Tutsi minority. The system of cattle vassalage was get lost by the Tutsi. And it is argued that the colonizers were the creator or the initiator of ethnic ideology that led to genocide in Rwanda and also led to a lot of killing in Burundi. The colonial construction of ethnic identity impacted both the formation of Hutu and Tutsi as different people among the Rwandan. So this ethnic ideology that was planted by colonizers are mainly identified in 3 categories. The first category is about racial theory. The colonizers initiated and propagated the Hutu as they constructed the Hutu as indigenous Bantus, and they identified the Tutsi as foreigners, as invader, as Hamite ideology, and they consider the Tutsis as superior race. And this ideology brings discrimination and also even the people saw themselves as different, although they shared the same language, they shared the same culture, they even worshipped the same God. The second ideology that was planted by the colonizers was identity card. The identity card was introduced by Belgium in order to make sure that there is no movement between Hutu and Tutsi. Because according to Hutu and the Tutsi, there was a possibility for a Hutu to earn some ketos, and in that case, if someone get like 10 cows, he was allowed to move from the class of Hutu to the Tutsi class. So in order to maintain this social class to be not moving from one class to another, the Belgium, they introduced identity card in there so that the people should not move from one class to another. The third ideology, which was also planted by the colonizers, was a theory of origin. This theory of origin portrayed the Tutsi as foreigners, invaders, but also they see them as foreigners from the North Africa, especially either in Ethiopia or either in Egypt. This ideology was planted and it was used even during the genocide, because when they killed the people, they throw them in the river so that they could go back to their country of origin. In short, I may say that ethnic ideology was socially constructed and intensified through the policies of colonizers. And these colonizers, during their period, they privileged the Tutsi minority and discriminated against the Hutu majority. And during the post-colonial period, the post-colonial period in Rwanda was also the Rwanda elite who took over from after the colonizers. They spread and they also inherited that ethnic ideology that was planted by the colonizers. It was constructed and it also shared and spread among the Rwandan society. At the same time, the Rwanda independence, this ideology belonged to Hutu extremists, which was taken as something that they should spread among the population, as though they saw that during the colonial period, they misinterpreted the history by saying that the Tutsi have been discriminating them. Now they took over as the government was in the hand of the Hutu. Now it was like a kind of revenge. Prior to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, this government, which was led by the Hutu, spread that ethnic ideology, but also a lot of massacres, which was related to ethnic ideology, happened against the Tutsi. And these massacres happened during the 1964, 1973, 1990, and also finally it happened in 94. So the genocide against the Tutsi was the final solution, but this discrimination, this ethnic ideology was a long-term discrimination against the Tutsi, which was mainly led by the government, which was led by the Hutu president, especially Habyarimana Juvenal, until the 94 genocide. Despite the fact that the Rwandan were unified by their culture and religion, but this genocide happened because of ethnic ideology, which first was planted by the colonizers, and later it was also spread by the government of the Hutu. So after genocide, there are a lot of consequences about the genocide, but something that I need to mention here is that this ethnic ideology that happened in Rwanda is somehow similar to what happened in Burundi, especially this ideology of seeing the Tutsi as invader, foreigners, strangers from somewhere else. And this brings a lot of discrimination during the time of colonial period, even after the colonial period. And up to now, for example, in Rwanda, we are happy that the government which stopped the genocide is able to bring reconciliation among the population of Rwanda, but still, even after 25 years of after genocide, there is still a lot of problem related to trauma, but not only trauma which is related to what happened in Rwanda, but there is a long-term effect that is reinforced by ethnic ideology which remain unplanted, which is in the mind of the people. Consequently, Rwanda society carries the continuing effect of sorrow and psychological wounds, ongoing prejudice, disagreement about the correct interpretation of Rwandan history, a lack of trust in the society, a loss of ethical and cultural value that used to unify Rwanda and continue economic difficulty in Rwanda. In short, I may say that in Rwanda, as I already mentioned, we share the same language, we share the same culture, and it is the same situation it is also in Burundi. We worship the same God, but still, that ethnic ideology that was planted during the colonial period and also was planted and spread during the after colonial period, it is still in the mind of people. Even while you see peace and reconciliation, but still the people, they see each other as stranger, or they see each other like another person. A lot of prejudice and sometimes mistrust is always there in both countries. And this, the government of Rwanda is initiating the program which we call I Am a Rwandan program. This is an initiative that seeks to address this ethnic ideology. This program has helped the Rwandans to understand their origin and the meaning of the tribes and clan in the pre-colonial period, before the colonial period. With the Rwandan program, I Am a Rwandan program, the Rwanda today examine their dark history toward shaping a bright future. They seek to uphold the moral value of all Rwandans and also restore their unity in building their country and eradicate genocide ideology for the sake of prosperity. So I may conclude by saying that what we face in Rwanda and Burundi, especially mass violence, mass killing, genocide that happened against the Tutsi in Rwanda, it is due to the seed which was planted by the colonizer. But also it is important as Christian to also mention that even the missionaries, they shared the same ideology. But also even after them, it was also spread by the political, the government, which took over after especially in Rwanda, after the colonizers. So up to now, we may say that everything is good in Rwanda. There is a program of unity and reconciliation, but still ethnic ideology, it is still planted in the mind of the people. This is how the program of I Am a Rwandan will address this issue. Thank you.
Good. Masimba, are you there? Right, we seem to have lost our co-moderator.
Oh, Masimba is there.
He's there, okay.
I can hear you.
Okay, go ahead then.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mookie, for the informative presentation. I think we will follow the same process. We will ask one participant to ask a question, and then for the rest of the participants, you can hold on to your questions until the time when we can have the discussions. So
if I may jump in here and suggest that we can take more than a couple of questions.
Okay.
Professor Basella is trying to reconnect again. So if we can have a little bit more than one question, that would help us a little bit engage with previous presentations.
Okay. Yeah.
So do we have any questions already in the chat room?
I haven't seen right. There's a question coming from Frank again. It says, all clerics, what is the history and role of the church in Africa to promote equality and equity? From your experience, knowledge, and understanding, anywhere in Africa or specifically in Cameroon. Okay, this was for Cameroon, and then it also says that it's also for Rwanda. The history of the church in Europe is well documented, and their role in development is elaborate. What about in Africa? Western culture throughout most of its history has been nearly equivalent to Christian culture. What is synonymous with Christianity in Africa? That's what is in the chat room. Do you want to respond now, or do we want others to come in with some more questions?
It is up to you as moderator.
A few more questions since we...
Okay, Masimba?
Or maybe you can respond to this one. I think she can respond to this one as we wait for more questions to come through.
Okay.
It is true that, as I mentioned, that the colonizers planted the seed of ethnic ideology in Rwanda, which was characterized by in three categories. One, it was race theory, racial theory, which was related by the ideology of Hamitic ideology. This Hamitic ideology portrays the Tutsi as superior race, and as Bantu, the Hutu as Bantu. This, I want to mention that the colonizers worked hand in hand with the missionaries.
Okay.
And they shared the same ideology, especially the ideology of Hamitic. The superior race was even justified by most of the missionaries, especially the Roman Catholic missionaries in Rwanda. After the colonizers and missionaries, the Rwandan government also worked hand in hand with the church in Rwanda after the missionaries. This ideology, which was planted and inherited from the colonizers and the missionaries, the politician in Rwanda used that ethnic ideology to discriminate the Tutsi, but also they worked hand in hand with the church in Rwanda because they also support the same idea, especially in the church. The church in Rwanda churches in Rwanda have a lot of institutions like hospitals, school, and many positions. So even in the church itself, you find that during the period after the colonial period, especially before genocide, even the Tutsi were discriminated in the church. And in some churches, they even also propagated that ideology. This is why you will find that even the church in Rwanda is accused to be involved in the spread of genocide, but also not only spread, but even the involvement, because Rwanda and Burundi are the most Christian countries in Africa. But what you see in Rwanda and Burundi, you can't connect Christianity and the situation in both countries. This means that Christianity in our countries has failed, especially for the prophetic voice, but also has also initiated and accepted that discrimination, inequality even in the church.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have?
If I may. Yes, it's why.
Okay.
I don't know if I could say something since
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't hear you, Emmanuel. Right. So I'm wondering whether we can now go to the presentation by Professor Basella, because I see he has connected now.
He's connected, but he doesn't hear us, so it's better to wait a bit.
Okay. So shall we move on then to Advocate Gloria? Okay. Do we have Advocate Gloria Mafare on the line?
She's
Can
connected.
You hear us?
Hello?
Yes. Yeah?
Yeah, she's online.
Okay. If she can also, I'm going to introduce her, and then we welcome her presentation. Advocate Gloria Mafela works for the Christian Council of Tanzania as advocacy and policy analyst. For 10 years, she has been working as human rights activist in the areas of women and children rights, socio-economic rights in the areas of natural resources accountability, and enhancing public understanding on their rights and access to justice with the Legal and Human Rights Center in Tanzania. She is going to speak about the persecution of albinos in Tanzania. So over to you, Advocate Gloria Mafale.
Her webcam is on, she's connected, but she's not at her desk. So.
Right.
But we have one more question here from Vwadi Vibila,
okay,
saying, why are we promoting the ethnic hostilities even after more than 50 years of our independences? Who has to be blamed? And then from Madagascar, we have Thierry Randrianavelo, who's saying, since Christianity were brought by foreigners, especially by colons, how do Rwandan people see your effort of preaching gospel? What do they feel? Thank you.
Okay. We can ask any of our speakers, to respond to those questions. Why is there still hostility in Africa?
May I respond to this question?
Yes, please.
I think we are not just blaming the colonizers. We are also responsible, because in my presentation, I said that we inherited what they planted. But also, we are not only blaming them, because, for example, if you analyze ethnic ideology in Rwanda and Burundi, a tribe in Africa is different to another because of language and culture. But in both countries, we speak the same language and we have the same culture, which means that, and if you see how the movement were from Hutu, you are able, before the colonizer, we were able to move from one class to another. For us, we see it not as ethnic group, but as classes, social classes. So we are not blaming them, but on one hand, we are blaming them because that seed that was planted.
Yes.
We are also responsible because we inherited that seed and spread it. But also, even today, the politicians in some countries, they are still using that differences and that division that they planted to divide so that they can have their powers. So in that case, and also during, for example, in some countries in Africa, when we fight during the election of our president, when we fight in some countries in Africa, sometimes you see the European countries, they are supporting one candidate, they are rejecting the other. And we can still continue to blame them because we are not producing gangs, we don't have industry to produce that, but they are distributing and selling us so that we can kill each other. So we by blaming them, we are not denying our responsibility. We are also African responsible. And this is why we have to know the truth and move on and search our own way of doing, using our culture, which unifies us.
Yeah.
And our values.
Okay.
So that is my viewpoint according to that question. But also going back to the second question, which was also directed to Rwanda, especially the church in Rwanda, how do we feel after genocide to preach the gospel?
Yeah.
Yes, the church has been feeling guilty after genocide because of the complicity of the churches in Rwanda in spreading discrimination and also spreading their ideology, but also having Christians who killed the other Christian. It is also the involvement of the church. But we feel comfortable to preach the gospel because after genocide, the church recognized the failure, and there have been a lot of voice from the church leaders to say sorry, for repentance. Like my church, the Presbyterian Church, was the first church to say we are sorry. We ask for forgiveness for our failure of raising our voice, but also for not challenging the system which was there to discriminate some people until they were killed.
Okay.
So we feel comfortable to preach the gospel.
Right. I see that
especially the gospel of reconciliation, because it is part of our ministry.
I see that the advocate Gloria has joined. Are you there? And also Professor Basella.
I'm back.
Oh, you've joined now.
Oh, we can hear him now. Oh, that's a miracle.
Right.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah. So maybe we can have your presentation now. Okay, maybe I can introduce you. That you are the Director for Theology, Interfaith Relations and Ecclesial Leadership Development at the All Africa Conference of Churches based in Nairobi, Kenya. And that he is also serving as a co-chair of the African Union Interfaith Dialogue Forum Steering Committee for Central Africa region. Okay, over to you, Reverend Basella Yela.
Thank you, Isabel. I'm sorry that I didn't listen to what my predecessor said. So I'm starting afresh, not knowing what has been said.
Okay, sorry.
So the issue of discrimination, xenophobia, and racism, to me, I don't find its place, like xenophobia and racism, in Eastern Congo, because I have to deal with the issue in Eastern Congo.
Yeah.
Conflict going on there. So we can't talk about xenophobia, we can't talk about racism in Eastern Congo, but we can talk about discrimination. And the conflict in Congo is so huge and multi-faces. The main cause of the conflict in Eastern Congo, I've classified three main causes, three. One is the issue of migration, citizenship, and property rights for migrants. Secondly, it is the issue of the control of the area of natural resources in Congo. And this, we tie it together with the rebel groups operating in Eastern DRC. And there we have, so far, I think we have 132 armed groups operating in Eastern Congo. And the third one is the rebel being supported by surrounding countries. So those are the three main issues. We always focus on the last issues, meaning the rebels, the control of resources, but much more, the conflict started earlier in 80s, when the first group of Rwandan citizens migrated to Eastern Congo, especially in the hills of Kivu. That one was before the Berlin Conference. So after that, there are some other waves of migration. We have the wave of 1850. After 1850, there's another wave that came to 1920 and 1930. Another wave came again, 1936 and 1957. So all those waves, people living surrounding countries, especially Rwanda, and going to DRC, and trying to live together, cohabitation with the people on the ground, it was not an issue. But the issue rose in the last decades. The wave of 1957. Most of those migrating from Rwanda to DRC, I think they were been living together, but they were kind of a denial of the right of property for those migrants from Rwanda. And in 1957, when that wave migrated to Congo, because of the conflict that rose up in Rwanda, so those who migrated before in the 80s identified themselves as a Congolese, and they didn't want to be associated with that wave of 1957. So that wave of 1957, 1959 identified themselves as Banyamulenge, as opposed a bit from those who came earlier before, but they were denied the right of land. That was a problem that started growing until 1990, when they felt uncomfortable living in that situation, privated with the right of land. They joined the rebels, Rwandese rebels in Uganda in 1990. Later, we will overthrow the government in Rwanda, and then be followed by the genocide. The genocide, over 2 million of Hutu left Rwanda and were spread in Congo and surrounding countries. And those who left, who went to Congo, they were followed by the army that came to overthrow the President Mobutu. And some of them are still living in that area, in Masisi and the forest, causing troubles. And I say 132 armed groups operating in DRC. Till now, they're still operating. Now, the issue of citizenship. Those who came earlier, the government of Congo at the time, when Mobutu was there, granted them the citizenship in 1972. But in 1982, Mobutu just decided to revoke that decree that granted them citizenship. They felt uncomfortable. Till now, they are being claimed, being denied the right of citizenship and the right of being Congolese. Besides, there are a lot of government army coming to Congo. Those are operating in Congo. As I speak, South Sudan sent some troops because they were defeated by army of Salva Kiir, and then they opened a corridor for them to come to Congo. We have now the operation Rwanda, Burundi, and the Congo army operating in that area. So it brings a better security. Besides, the local armed force, the arm of defense for the local people, those are the people who claim that they don't want anyone to come and rob their land. So they are fighting now, those who are looking for land. You see, there is now a kind of trouble, conflict, land, mineral have entered into game, and the implication of, international corporations coming to look for mineral. So that has created a lot of trouble in Eastern Congo. We don't have enough time to go deeper, but in brief, this is what can I say, the reason of the trouble in Eastern Congo.
Okay, thank you. there are two questions that have come. One is about what is the responsibility of the African church? Because we are talking about the past, but we are not talking about the responsibility of the African church. This one is coming from the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, Bishop Malusi. And the second question is from Vibila Vaudi, Reverend Doctor, and she's asking, could you explain and clarify what do you mean by the issue of citizenship and the issue of land? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm handing over to Masimba, right? And then you share with us your responses to these questions later. Masimba.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So our last speaker, sorry.
Yes.
Yes, it's about the last speaker, Advocate Gloria Mafale.
Right. Our last speaker is Advocate Gloria Mafale, who works for the Christian Council of Tanzania as an advocacy and policy analyst. So Advocate Mafole works in a number of areas to do with natural resources, social and economic analysis. And she will speak about the persecution of albinos. Over to you, Advocate. You also have 7 minutes, which will start now.
Thank you very much for the meeting, and sorry for some of the internet problems. But as we said, in Tanzania, we have faced real killing of albino related to discrimination and racism. And as we said, racism is all about some people thinking that the albino color is lesser, weaker, and has some problems. But however, the racism and the discrimination against albinos in Tanzania is around issues of poverty. This is because many people believe that using albinos board parties, sometimes somewhere, you can gain richness, you can get political positions, but also it is about witchcraft. So some people will just kill albinos to get some parts so that they can sell them in higher prices to the people, especially around mining areas or during political party, during elections and things of that sort. So having their parts sold in high price, it raises a lot of killings. However, we have seen, for example, in 2015, we had like 4 people killed. In 2015, 6 people killed. But from 2016 to date, we have no really reported cases because it's not like election year, and a lot of efforts have been put.
We can't hear you anymore.
Can't hear you.
A lot of
yeah, it's come back.
Capacity building to ensure that at least people understand that we cannot use parts of albinos to go into politics or to get mining from the mining areas. Furthermore, the judiciary has also been very, very helpful to try to lower down the killings of albinos. For example, they have decided almost 67 cases are in court about killing of albinos and chopping off their hands. Out of the 67 cases, 34 have already been has got a death sentence towards the killing of albino. However, those who have chopped off albino parties, they have got a sentence of 8 up to 62 years. So at least the community now have started to look at it very serious and try to calm it down. And what really worries is that since the election of 2015, gone down. However, there's still a lot of thinking and some chopping off. For example, in 2017, they tried to chop like 4 people. Albinos were just
it's freezing. Sorry, we can't hear you. Okay. Masimba?
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
We can't hear her.
Yeah, we are sorry. We are so sorry for that, Advocate Gloria Mafale. It was not able to. We can't hear her. We'll probably try to get her on, but maybe what we can do is that in the meantime we could take a few more questions or try to have those that were asked before answered as we try to. So of those presenters who are still online, we can probably throw a question or two at them so that they can respond.
Yeah, maybe we can go back to Professor Basella on the issue of citizenship and the issue of land.
Yeah, I think Professor Vibila asked a question, asked me to explain the issue of citizenship and the issue of the land. When people migrated from Rwanda to DRC, it was for several reasons. The security, where they are coming from, their life was kind of being threatened, or they are being used as for labor. Because the wave of 1920 and 1930, that wave of people, Banyarwanda, who came from Congo, they came because during Leopold II, the cruelty of Leopold II killed a lot of people, and there were need for manpower in the Congo. This is why the colonial power brought those people in Congo, and they never go back. Since 1920, 1930, they had children, the generation and generation. So those people didn't go back. They wanted to be identified as a Congolese. At the time, the nationality was granted to them, but the parliament say no, we cannot grant nationality to people as a group. It should be requested individually. It was a big debate in the parliament, but as far as history concerned, was that in 2004, so the nationality was restored to them. Now, when they came, they found the people surrounding them. There were Afulero, there were people living in those areas. You know, as African, land mean a lot. So they could not live, they wanted to expand, to have lands. where they can cultivate and so on. But the local people, the people they found, they say, no way, we cannot cede the land that was given by our ancestors. So they feel like being denied the right for land, the right for property. So they are feeling being uncomfortable. This is why sometimes they join, as I said, Uganda, they join the army that came to Rwanda to overthrow the government of Rwanda and so on. That is the problem. The church role. I think the conflict between Rwanda and Congo, the church at a certain time played a role. I cannot say that it was enough. Peace is a process. It should continue. I remember them visiting, the church leader visiting Kabila, when Rwanda and Congo tension was higher. The church leader went to visit Kabila to tell him, no, it's better for you to talk with your brother Kagame. And they want to see President Kagame say, no, it is better for you to talk with your brother Kabila. And the chief cabinet went for both sides, and finally they talked. This is the initiative came from church leaders. But I can say this is not enough. It should continue because, I mean, the fire is burning in Eastern Congo. And the church have to raise its voice and see what it can do to calm the situation. So the church did something, but it is not enough. It should continue doing peace work in that region.
Masimba?
Yes.
Masimba? Are you there, Masimba?
Yes, he's there.
Okay, can he moderate the questions?
Well, I will read the questions to Masimba if that's okay.
Yes.
So we
that's
have
fine. So
Professor
I was just going to say that we have reached the end now of the speakers that we had, and we are now into that time that Dr. Piri talked about, which is the half an hour for discussions. So we are now going to have questions directed at the presenters, and after this round of questions, we will also then have presenters responding and giving their closing remarks. So we can then start the session around questions, and then also we'll be following that order until we get to the end of our webinar.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
My question goes to the advocate from the Christian Council of Churches. I want to ask, in the process of discrimination against the albino, which of course is not limited to Tanzania alone, but within the context, how culpable is the church's involvement in this historical process of discrimination against the albinos?
Thank you, Adebayo. Adebayo, if we can also ask you to type your question in the chat room so that everyone can have a look at it, because the sound is not very strong.
I'm actually trying to do that. I'm on the road traveling. I'm just trying to pick with the. So I'm using my smartphone.
Okay.
Thank you. Moderators, can I also bring other questions?
Yeah, yes.
So the very first question was by Reverend Frank Ojwang, and it was addressed to Professor Demain. He said, very good presentation. Thank you. How is education being used to address this neo-colonial thinking among Black South Africans? How can the language, churches, values, patriotism, etc. be used to promote Ubuntu? Do you think we can achieve equality between Black and white South Africans?
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sure. Thank
Yes,
you
we
very much.
can.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think, there are a few things, but I think let me just start by saying that, when you think about, and the question is alluding to that, between reconciliation between Black and white South Africans, I think it's important for us to take a step back, in this regard, simply because I think if you talk about reconciliation, I think, we need to start with the reconciliation with Black people themselves, in us affirming ourselves and who we are. I think that's a starting point, because I think to a large extent, if you think about the legacy of colonialism and apartheid, I think Black people have been alienated from themselves, first and foremost. They've been alienated from the means of production, and of course that increases or speaks to the issue of inequality in a country like South Africa. So even before we get to interracial reconciliation, if you will, I think important step or starting point would be to deal with the issue of Black people affirming themselves as full people and not as non-persons, which is oftentimes the case. And in a way trying to address also the issue of xenophobia through that. So I think that's a very important starting point. The other issue around education, and I think here in South Africa, especially at universities, we were given a huge wake-up call a couple of years ago with the student uprisings in South Africa, where students wanted to know about this, this colonial heritage that is oftentimes transferred through education, etc. And, issues around decoloniality is a very important issue that we are addressing at many of the institutions of higher learning as we speak. Of course, it's quite difficult because, you also need to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but at the same time also be quite critical in terms of how we engage with ideas that by and large is where racism is entrenched, especially ideas coming from the West. So how do we engage with these things more constructively? And I think in that sense, I think we took a step in the right direction, but of course we've got a lot of work to do. And this is just the start, but I think we are already engaged with many of these discussions, not only with our peers, but in many cases we find that many of these discussions are being, we have these discussions in many of our lecture halls and classrooms, which I think is, as I've said, a step in the right direction. But of course, it's difficult.
Mm. Okay. Segma, do you want to read the next one?
So again, Adebayo's question. My question is, how culpable is the role of the churches in the process of discrimination against albino people? This is to Advocate Gloria Mafole. And we also have Professor Vibila saying, we all received other citizenship, but do we not ask? But we do not ask especially land. DRC has 9 neighboring countries. The ethnic hostility is only in the east part. So, and she says the church has to speak the truth.
Can I just add one more from Micheline Kamba on the issue of albinos? She says, I thank this communication that raised the question of the albinos. The church response to that issue is to approach these people and involve them in the different activities. Yeah.
Okay. So if we can hear from Advocate Mafole,
yes,
and Professor Basella, thank you.
Okay, the church response, for example, in trying to curb the albino killings is really growing and has taken a big part. For example, during the high time when the albinos were killed, the church opened up the centers, like school centers, like somewhere they keep the albino and protect them. But also through the teachings and through the mobilizing of the communities, we are really able to support and ensure that the albinos safe and are not shocked. They can attend school while protected, but they can also live in a protected area. So it is true that as we see the albino killings have dropped since 2016, but the church has really played a big role to mobilize the community, to teach the community, to try to put the beliefs. Just remember that they do the killings because of witchcraft beliefs and because of poverty. So the church played a big role and still have to play a big role, especially now as we are going towards elections, because they also chop albinos and use albinos' parts during election as a charm to be elected and loved or something of that sort. So the church has to continue to manifest and put a lot of effort and training to the communities to ensure that they really don't believe that you can use albino part for gaining political positions. And we'd wish to see the calming situation as it is now since 2016. Yeah.
Okay, maybe from Professor Basella.
Yes, on Professor Vibila's concern about the church telling the truth. I think it is true that Congo is surrounded by 9 countries. So Congo shares border with 9 countries. It is true that among the 9 countries, problems always arose from Eastern Congo, where Congo shares border with 4 countries. Those are Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania. This is true. I think the problem is integration. According to what I may say, it's integration. People migrated should be integrated, feel at home, and cut all umbilical cordon from outside. It's like in Western Congo, we have people from Angola. They have been calling them Bazombo. They came for a long time. They have been established. They live in the border with Angola. Some of them have even properties in Congo side. So there is no really problem that side. I think it's a matter of integration. So as a church, we should help also our people to be integrated where they are living.
The one that came from the General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches. So yeah, it was about the African Church as taking responsibility for whatever, scenes of apartheid or racism and ethnicity. I think you responded to that one earlier on.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. What happened between 2 presidents, Kagame and Kabila?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? Right. If there are no questions, then we want to give an opportunity to our speakers, any of them, to say whatever you wanted to say which was not covered during your presentation. So you only have 3 minutes, right? Let's start with Dr. Solomons.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will be very brief. I think in terms of racism itself, I think perhaps there's a need for us to move, the conversation not only as a problem of racism as an ethical issue or a socio-political issue, but I think at the heart of the matter is racism as a theological issue, which I think is in a way that goes to the heart of the matter. And as far as I'm concerned, the problem with racism, especially racism as a threat to the Christian faith, I think it's because racism is based on the fundamental irreconcilability of people. And I think that for me is, that's quite dangerous, because that's not only a political or ethical issue, but I mean, that is a threat to the Christian faith itself, because of course we believe that we are unified as people through Christ. And I think that is, for me, is an issue to be taken very seriously, and that's why it's important for us as the Christian community to address this issue with with all the energy that we have. Yeah, so that's in a way how I want to conclude my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Could we have the last word, from Reverend Emmanuel? How do you see us moving forward with the issue of Cameroon?
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect.
Me, please? Okay. Yeah, please, with the issue of Cameroon, I will conclude that it's an issue of a policy. I think the government has got to stand up to make some policies, especially with the crisis in which we find ourselves. And the church that have in the past been kind of brutalized into silence has got to speak, no matter the situation. There's been so much fear within the country that everyone has not done anything or little, because a lot of people are afraid for themselves. So we hope that while looking forward to talk more on the Cameroonian crisis all the time, I just wanted to let us know that it's kind of related to this tribal issues of tribalism. And we can develop that in subsequent time. I thank you. So we have very bad network here. You forgive us for that, please.
Well, actually, now we see you and hear you clearly.
Yeah, it's better now. Okay, could we also ask, Reverend Dr. Mookie, how do we move forward with the issue of Burundi and Rwanda? Maybe we have lost her.
I think she's still connected. Reverend Mookie? Well, maybe later.
Okay, maybe we move on to Reverend Professor Basella. Yale, what is your final word on moving forward on the issue of Eastern Congo?
The call is to our church leaders and also the country leaders, the head of state of the Great Lake regions, to understand that we don't have any factory for guns here in Southern Africa, but those guns are made outside for a purpose of killing ourselves. They should understand that we have to stop. And the resources that we have in our countries will be exploited in an ethical way, because it will help all the region. The natural resources in Congo, when well exploited by the those international cooperation or whatever, it will boost the economy of the region and of the continent. We don't need to be fighting, killing ourselves like animals. Human life should be respected with its dignity. So the head of state, we should, head of churches, plead to the head of churches to understand that human life should be respected, because the last decade in that region, we have over 10 million of people who died in a way or another. And enough is enough. So we have to stop.
Good. Thank you. And then Advocate Gloria, how do we move forward with the issue of albinos? Because it's not only Tanzania. I come from Malawi and we have a similar problem. Okay, how do we move forward, and how do the churches respond? Maybe she's not connected.
She's connected.
Okay. Advocate Gloria?
Internet is really a challenge for the webinars. Yes. Now she disconnected, yes.
Okay. Now I'll ask Masimba to summarize.
Before that, I'd like to point that Evelyn Parker, one of the attendees, she's currently based in South Africa, and she's a CCIA commissioner from USA.
Yeah.
He said that I believe that at some point of the conversation, we should broaden the conversation to include the concept of white supremacy, which is an ideological concept that informs racism, xenophobia, Afrophobia, etc.
Okay. I think it was addressed, with the presentation from South Africa,
Yes.
and all the other presentations where they are trying to say where is the origin of all these conflicts and discrimination and xenophobia, where it's coming from, because it starts with the issue of white supremacy, with the coming of the missionaries, with the colonization, and then the impact of those issues and challenges to us today. So I see the connection there.
Absolutely. Okay.
Right. Masimba?
Masimba has disconnected. I think he's trying to reconnect again.
Right. Okay. Then with that, I hand over to Segma.
Okay, so I would like to thank all those who have joined us for this webinar. I know that technology is always a challenge when we organize webinars because this is live, so with all the last minute glitches that can come up. But we had, I think, very insightful and rich presentations from our various speakers, and we're very grateful to them because we have learned a lot. I'm also happy to say that despite the technical challenges, we had a good attendance. At some point, we were 31 participants, which makes us the second or third best attended webinar so far. So I'm very proud of our continent, and I hope that in the future we can organize similar conversations, and that technology will less be a challenge as we move with these conversations. And these webinars are just a beginning of a conversation. We hope that there will be more face-to-face meetings and also other ways of discussing and reflecting more on roots of racism, xenophobia, discrimination, and how to challenge it and address it as churches.
Yes.
And I'm seeing that there are comments in the chat room, that's why, sorry.
Yes.
So grateful to the moderators for being available and facilitating the conversation. Very grateful to the speakers for the insightful and rich presentations. And thank you for all the attendees. We had participants from Europe as well as from North America, as in addition to our brothers and sisters in Africa who were with us. The next webinar will be exactly in a week from now, and it will be focusing on Central and South America as well as Spanish-speaking Caribbean. And it will be again focusing on racism, xenophobia, and discrimination in the region. And it will be in Spanish. And as some of you know, there's a big generation of people in that region who resisted speaking English as a way of resistance to domination of some countries. And I want to honor that. So the webinar will be in Spanish. And the recorded version, there will be one in Spanish and one in English. So stay tuned for the next webinar. This one is recorded as the previous ones, and the link will be made available very soon. So from the Commission of Churches on International Affairs of the World Council of Churches, I'd like to thank you all for bringing your contribution for this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Segma, and to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Asante sana.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye.
Bye.